You're listening to the Huddle Up Podcast with Chad Jensen and Zack Kelberman. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com and sound off. And now it's time to drop some knowledge.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast, presented as always by Mile High Huddle and 24/7 Sports. I'm your host, Chad Jensen. With me, as always, is my partner in crime. He is your Denver Broncos reporter for 24/7 Sports. He is Zack Kelberman. Zack, we're tracking this particular episode Wednesday evening, and I won't quite say that the you-know-what has hit the fan, but Chad Kelly at least knows his fate now, and he avoided the slammer like MC Hammer.
Yeah, he did. I mean, he reached a plea agreement and he, pleaded less to a second-degry misdemeanor and doesn't have to face jail time. The video, though, Chad, I mean, when TMZ dropped that video, it really made the months that we've been imagining what it looked like Chad Kelly stumbling out of a house worth it. I mean, dressed as Woody from Toy Story. He looked a little inebriated of some sort. I mean, it was quite the visual.
He fought the law and the law won. I mean, let's face it. But yeah, we were just talking about it off air. If you guys go watch, it's up on the website. It's not hard to find, but he's getting chased out of that front door. You see it from like the door cam type thing, and he just looks startled, like he doesn't understand what is happening to me right now. I'm getting chased out of a house, like
with the vacuum cleaner part. Like, why is this happening to me right now? How did my life get here?
All I thought was I got a text from a chick and booty call, and whoa, what's happening? Or at least that's the theory, right? That's the tinfoil hat.
That's something I heard. Like, he was on a booty call of some sort. He broke off from the party and like went over to someone's house, and the husband or whoever came home and found them, and next thing you know, he's in jail and cut from the Broncos.
But it seems like to me, to refute that theory or that rumor, it seems like to me his woman was with him at the party or had been part of the tapestry of that story earlier at the party when Von Miller was like telling the staff, the security staff, don't let that guy leave the party because he was causing trouble and apparently even trying to step to his own teammates because he was so looped out of it. And so they went and sat him down and kind of quarantined him, and apparently the word was, don't let him out, because they knew something bad could happen to him, right? Something like what ended up happening could happen, and so security kept an eye on him, and he squirted out. But it seems like, now I'm not going to go on, in depth and try and research this, but if I recall right, his woman had some part to play in that story earlier in the evening. That doesn't mean the booty call aspect is, doesn't rule it out, but who knows?
Now that you mention it, that was originally reported. They thought it was a domestic issue, like he was cheating on her or something. They broke up or something, right, and he was being consoled or he lashed out. So you might be right about that, Chad. And then the booty call theory, which I can't believe we're even discussing right now.
Maybe he just be, as he's walking out of the club, he hits Tinder and goes, "Damn, that's just down the street."
Right? Yeah, I'll hop over and catch a quick Uber and double up for the evening.
But you guys go check out that video. It'll make you laugh. It's sad, because Chad Kelly was literally on the doorstep of his big break in the NFL. And you could say, Elway had already given him his big break by drafting him and keeping him around the organization for almost 2 years, but he was literally about to get his shot as a starting quarterback in the NFL, and he just crapped the bed. But what could have been, who knows? Maybe he's going to have to follow the same suit as Johnny Football, Zach, and try the AAF.
Supposedly, he still wants to play. I believe Mike Kliss reported today that he hopes to latch on with another team. The Broncos, from what I've heard, and everyone is saying they're not interested in him. Elway really felt spurned by Chad Kelly. We've talked about it a lot, Chad, but he gave him that chance, and he had that checkered history in college, and he kind of went against Elway's trust. So he's not coming back to the Broncos, but for him as an individual, I hope he does get a chance elsewhere. He still has that physical talent. And you remember when he came in the game against the Rams, I mean, that stadium went crazy. They booed Keenum off the field, and they just went crazy for Chad Kelly. So there is potential there. I hope it does work out for him.
Definitely has arm talent, and he definitely has just kind of that it, man. When he's on the field, if you're one of his teammates, anything's possible. And, maybe that also includes bad things, but as a player on the field, you believe anything's possible in a positive sense. Right. So we wish him the best. But yeah, he's, as far as Elway and the Broncos are concerned, he's definitely old news. So we got a lot to get to today. We're going to grade the Denver Broncos offseason. We're going to talk about some of the quarterback buzz that surrounds the Broncos here heading into the home stretch of draft season. But first, a couple of quick matters of business. You guys make sure you're following the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. Really easy to do. You can do it while you're listening to the show. Flip open your phone, open up Twitter at HuddleUpPod, follow. Done deal. You guys have done a great job funneling over and following that account. It's over 1,000 followers now, which is a great milestone, but we want to keep that thing running and growing, because that's only a fraction of the amount of people that listen to this podcast every day. So we want to try and get as many of you who are listening that have Twitter funneled over to actually following the account. And it's a great way to keep your finger on the pulse of the show, so to speak, in real time. And also, while you're at it, while you're in the mood of helping out the show, take some time, leave a creative review on iTunes, give us a 5-star rating. You guys, we say it over and over, episode in, episode out. You have no idea how helpful that is to Zach and I and Nick and Carl in growing the show and competing with the other podcasts in our little realm on iTunes. So if you haven't done that and you listen on iTunes, please take a second, get that done. All right, Zach. So again, we're going to go through and grade the offseason, break down some of the pivotal moves that have been made thus far in 2019. But before we do that, let's touch on some of the buzz that came out on the pre-draft visits heading into the home stretch, as I said, of the draft season. First things first, Zach, ya boy, Drew Lock, he's coming to town.
He is, yeah. The Broncos are hosting him on an official pre-draft visit, one of their top 30 visits, and it's not surprising they pass up Locke and a lot of other quarterbacks at the Combine, but they will be doing their due diligence even if they're not going with Locke or quarterback at 10. I still think he's the best option for Elway. I still think Elway has interest in him, but based on what he said and done, though, I think quarterback is moving away from the number 10 pick, but he's still going to bring him in. He's bringing Dwayne Haskins in. He'll probably bring in Kyler Murray for all intents and purposes, and Daniel Jones. But Drew Lock, I still think he has his guy in hand. It could shift, though, when he brings in Haskins. Teams tend to fall in love with guys late in the draft process, and it could sway Elway's opinion. It will be a consensus pick, but quarterback is still on the table, Chad, and bringing them in now is just adding more smoke to that fire.
It's definitely still on the table, and it would not completely shock me at all if it ends up being a quarterback at pick 10. My gut right now is just telling me, put it this way, I'm buying the smoke screen. I don't think... Just based on, you look at the history of Elway as a front office guy and what really has sold me on this notion in terms of listening to my intuition is just going back to the blueprint idea. And what worked for him in that 2012 offseason that ended up paying such massive dividends over a 4-year period of time, he thinks he's kind of reconstructing that, or he's trying to reconstruct that now. He's got the defensive-minded coach to come in and stabilize the organization like John Fox. Check. Vic Fangio in the house. He's got a former Super Bowl champion, MVP quarterback veteran, although Joe Flacco does not, let's face it, hold a candle to Peyton Manning. It's a similar type of mold, right? A proven guy who's been there, done that.
He's elite.
Yeah, right. Now, the next piece of that puzzle is, in 2012, Elway waited until round 2 and grabbed Brock Osweiler. Now, the caveat here, obviously, is in 2012, the Broncos finished 8-8, and they were in the playoffs, so they were in the bottom third at the draft in round 1. They weren't holding a top 10 pick, so he wasn't quite as within as close of striking distance of one of the elite blue chippers that year as he is this year. So that's the one component, Zach, that could really change this. And we've talked a lot about it on the show over the last few months, is that will Elway really go in through 2 drafts having top 10 picks in back-to-back years and not come out of it with one of the blue-chip elite quarterback prospects to serve as the long-term franchise guy for the next 10 years?
We have talked about that so much. And if you would have asked me even a few weeks ago, I would have told you that Drew Lock or Haskins or whoever is still on the table at 10. But after that Flacco press conference, the theory that I'm imagining in my head is that they're going to go with Flacco as the starter. He really is locked in there, and his job security is set. And I think they will pass up on quarterback at 10, and they will aim for the second or third rounds. You get a guy like, let's say, Jared Stidham in the second or third round. You have your veteran Flacco. You have your rookie. If he can develop in year 2, he can show something great. If not, you still have that quarterback class in 2020. Elway has shown he's not afraid of kicking the can down the road, and he genuinely feels like Flacco can be the starter, not just this year, but for years to come, for multiple years. So I don't necessarily think they're locked into a quarterback, no pun intended. I think the opposite now. I'm not buying the smoke screens. I genuinely believe they're going to go at another position and take a quarterback in the second or third round.
Yeah, because put it this way, in terms of trying to put yourself in the Elway mindset, here you just moved some mountains. Well, not exactly, but you orchestrated a trade to get Joe Flacco. Now, signing Case Keenum, he had a little proven something to him. He had one playoff win under his belt. I mean, Joe Flacco's won 7 playoff games on the road. Okay, this is a guy he's got a lot of experience, right? He's been to the top of the mountain. He's been a Super Bowl MVP. You get this guy. Here he is. He's got Joe Flacco, and he thinks he can compete now. He just signed some great players in free agency. He's got some coaches. All the table is stacked. It's laid. It's ready to rock and roll. The feast, the smorgasbord, let's do this. You think he's going to go and holding the top 10 pick with that mindset and go, I think I can compete this year and push Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. No, I'm going to go ahead and take this 10th pick on a player who's not going to play this year. He's going to warm the bench instead of I'm getting a player who adds to that tapestry that can help me compete right now. And that's exactly what a Devin White or an Ed Oliver or, if a Quinnen Williams dropped or something like that, that's what it could do.
Right, and the best way to compete with Mahomes, you can have Flacco and Locke. You're still not going to compete with them offensively. The best way to challenge Kansas City is by stifling them on defense. And the Broncos proved they can do it last year with Vance Joseph. And based on the defense they're putting together, they've shown that they're one piece away, a Devin White, a Devin Bush away, from really being that championship 2015 defense again. And that's how you beat Mahomes. So that's why I also believe it's a great point you made, Chad, that, their defense, I feel like, is their target this offseason. They got a lockdown slot corner in Callahan. They got a safety corner in Kareem Jackson. They're obviously prioritizing the defense. And if they can get a Devin White, you put that in this lineup, no NFL team would want to play the Broncos. And Elway, falling on his past laurels, like you mentioned, he wants to reassemble the past glory teams. He thinks that Flacco is Manning. He thinks this defense can be 2015. He thinks that Fangio could be Wade Phillips. All the parallels are there. And that's why I firmly believe that quarterback is not going to be an option at 10. I think defensive player, and it could be a guy who falls like Ed Oliver, is going to be like high on the draft board.
Another quarterback, though, notwithstanding our current gut feeling that the Broncos are bringing in, is, according to Schefter, Dwayne Haskins. He's also going to be amongst the 30 allocated visits that the Broncos are going to be allowed before the draft. And we've heard, obviously, a lot more in terms of the Broncos being tied to Drew Lock, but I've also been told that Drew Haskins is very high on their list as well, and they especially like him in a West Coast-oriented system, which is exactly what Rich Scangarello is going to be deploying in Denver.
Yeah, and he fits the mold a lot more than Kyler Murray. So he'd be number 2, I think, among the upper-tier quarterbacks on Elway's board. And like I mentioned earlier, sometimes these prospects come in and general managers and scouts and everyone, they fall in love with guys. It would not be surprising to see Haskins usurp Locke on the Broncos' big board, but they will be among higher than Kyler Murray. I just think they're not going to go quarterback, but Haskins is sure an option. And, there's a rumor out there with the Raiders targeting Drew Lock. And if they do that, it can push Haskins right to the Broncos at number 10. They have to hang in there. They have to do their due diligence because they can get a quarterback, and then the decision becomes Devin White or a quarterback or a DeAndre Baker or a quarterback. That's a good problem to have for Elway.
If you were in that room and the chips are down, the Broncos are on the clock, and you could take either Dwayne Haskins or Drew Lock, which guy would you take for the Broncos? If the decision in the room is, look, let's go ahead and take the opportunity. A couple of guys fell to us at 10. Which one of those would you take?
Personally, I think Drew Lock is the guy for me. I just think he has the higher ceiling. He's more of a conventional quarterback, and I feel like he'd fit this offense better with Scangarello. Not taking anything away from Haskins, I think he'll be a good player in the NFL, but for me, Lock is more explosive for a quarterback. I see more game-breaking potential with Lock than Haskins.
Yeah, and the arm talent, I agree, by the way, it would be Drew Lock for me as well. The arm talent is just next level, and as much as I like Dwayne Haskins, if you turn on and watch his tape, he's very smart. He knows exactly where to put the ball in terms of exploiting the weakness of the opposing defense, but it's just crossing route after crossing route at Ohio State. And he had those 50 touchdowns, and there's a few big plays sprinkled in there, obviously. But his instinct to want to push the ball downfield and to challenge opposing defenses vertically, it's just not there. And when he does choose to do it, he's not very accurate that way. Whereas Drew Lock, he's got his downside as well. His pocket presence at times leaves much to be desired. But I think you put him in a system with, especially in Denver, with a guy like Rich Scangarello, who is a quarterback whisperer of sorts, kind of a newfangled quarterback whisperer, and you give him a year on the bench at least behind Joe Flacco to soak it in, learn all the playbook, absorb the new technique, and kind of soak in, so to speak, the life of being a pro. And I think Drew Lock could be something in this league.
Yeah, and based on what I heard at the Combine, he interviewed very, very well. Teams were really impressed by how he handled himself. And I think once Elway gets him in a room, Drew Lock, he's going to come away very, very impressed. And it's going to cinch Lock over Haskins for him. I think in the end, if you're looking for franchise quarterback, if you're looking to swing for the fences, you can't really go wrong in this class with Haskins or Lock. I just feel for the Broncos' benefit long-term, Lock, it has to be their guy.
Yeah, what do you think of the notion that if Drew Lock would have come out last year, he would have been like a third-round pick?
Yeah, he would have been well behind the Mayfields and the Sam Darnold. Even I think Josh Rosen would have a higher grade than him. He would have been a second, third-rounder in that draft class, which just shows how strong it was. And it just shows that the Broncos, they had their shot at a couple guys there. So down the road, that decision will have to be revisited.
All right, so we still got a lot to get to. We're going to unveil our grades for the Denver Broncos thus far through the offseason, through two crucial periods of the offseason, from the coaching search to free agency. But first, before we do that, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, you guys, let's talk about the offseason and how it's unfolded thus far for your Denver Broncos. Now, if we rewind the tape, and we're sitting here on Black Monday, and the Denver Broncos are just a couple hours removed from handing Vance Joseph his walking papers, there's a lot of unanswered questions at that point, right? A lot of forks in the road to come that Elway and the Broncos could have chosen to go left or right, and whichever option they chose would, the fate of the franchise hinged on those decisions. Well, even though we might not necessarily have the ultimate answers yet, because none of those moves that have been made since have come to any kind of fruition on the field of play, we can at least get a feeling and a vibe for how things have shaken out thus far. And the first thing, obviously, was the Broncos brought in 5 head coaching candidates to interview. Among them were Chuck Pagano, Mike Munchak, Zach Taylor, Brian Flores, and then Vic Fangio last. And it felt like, Zach, for a minute there, it was a done deal. Mike Munchak's coming to Denver. He's getting another opportunity to be a head coach. But sticking to his plan, Elway keeps that one last interview appointment on Monday following the Chicago Bears' loss in the divisional round of the playoffs. And he and Fangio just share a brain, hit the ground running. Next thing you know, Vic Fangio is introduced as the 17th head coach in Broncos history. And then from there, as we know, Rich Scangarello is hired as offensive coordinator. He brings in Fangio, Ed Donatel, his former secondary coach, to be the defensive coordinator. And then multiple, obviously, other successive hires made to fill out the coaching staff. So let's start with that. In terms of the coaching search, the way it could have shaken out, what the options were available to John Elway at the time, how would you grade the way the Broncos have executed the coaching search at the first part of the offseason program?
Well, let me just say A+ for firing Vance Joseph finally. I just want to beat a dead horse and say that once more. The candidates, Munchak and Fangio, were great picks. I was not crazy about Flores. I thought Zach Taylor was a little too inexperienced. I thought he should have been a coordinator candidate, and Chuck Pagano, who took the Bears defensive coordinator job. I don't know if that was a courtesy interview or what, but based on how it went, Mike Munchak was the front runner there, and it seemed like Elway was about to hire him. Then at the 11th hour, he met with Fangio, and they, like you said, Chad, they shared a brain, and they saw eye to eye, not as just football men, but as men in general, around the same age, from the same generation. They really had quick chemistry, and that deal came together fast. And hiring Fangio, he was my number one choice once certain other coaches were off the table, like John Harbaugh, and I give that an A by far. And the staff that he's assembled, the new age approach on offense with Scangarello, to hire Mike Munchak as your O-line coach, who was just interviewing for a head coaching job, that was great. Some of his assistants on defense. I really give the entire head coaching search by Elway, barring, except for the candidates, it has to be an A. I mean, easily.
I'm going to give it an A-, and here's why. The only way I think you could, well, let me put it this way. I think the best way that you could have maximized Vic Fangio, because his expertise is on the defensive side of the ball, he's going to continue to call the plays defensively. Like if you even go back to when John Fox was hired, Fox hired and brought in a defensive coordinator in Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen coordinated the defense. Now, obviously, John Fox had an input and an influence on the defense, but he was more administrative, big picture, and he let Dennis Allen call plays, and Dennis Allen got a head coaching job out of that, and then Jack Del Rio the same. Whereas with Vic Fangio, he's coming in, and as the head coach, he's going to call the plays. So his focus is going to be very much consumed with not only big picture, but also the actual point of attack, game planning, calling plays in the moment. So I think it would have been, to give it an A+, for example, I think the dream would have been for the Broncos to go out and find a more proven offensive coordinator. But I don't say that with any kind of critical note in that I think they got it wrong. I don't. That's not what I'm saying. I think Rich Scangarello, because, if you look at what the options were available to the Broncos outside of, maybe wooing someone from the college level up to be an OC, I mean, they didn't have by that point a million options to choose from as far as proven guys, with the exception of been there, done that's like Mike McCoy's out there and guys like that. So I understand, and I think that Rich Scangarello was, Zach, one of probably the best choice at that point, getting someone up from the Shanahan tree, a young guy on the come, and all that's great. But in a perfect world, you would like to saddle Vic Fangio with a more proven offensive coordinator, like if they could have figured out a way to make it work with Kubiak, and Kubiak wouldn't have stuck to his guns so much about, his personnel that he wanted coaching-wise to come in and all that, the point of demarcation where they ended up not sharing a brain. That idea of giving Fangio a proven guy who knows his business in the NFL, an offensive mind that's almost an equal but not quite, that would have been the dream, but I still think the Broncos did a great job. I'm going to go ahead and say it an A as well. That's the only thing, though, keeping it from an A+.
I think personally that Fangio gets more credit for talking Elway out of the Kubiak arrangement and out of that old school system, that archaic system with Rick Dennison and Brian Periani, to get a guy like Scangarello, who is from that Shanahan tree, and Elway has made it very clear that he admires Kyle Shanahan and probably should have hired him, and he regrets that now. But that's exactly what they needed. They have a 29-year-old quarterbacks coach. This is that new age approach to the offense the Broncos were lacking the last couple years since Manning retired. It's time to get on the same page. And I think Fangio gets a lot of credit for coming in and having the stones to come up to Elway and say, listen, I am not going to take on Gary Kubiak. I don't want him forced on me. Let him go elsewhere. Let him take his guys elsewhere. I want to bring in my fresh blood. And to me, that's what gives him an A. I mean, he has that established, that respect already that Vance Joseph never had in 2 years. Fangio came in a week, was already calling the shots. So to me, it's an easy A.
Yeah, and I agree with you that as soon as Gary Kubiak started making demands and that type of thing, I give props to Vic Fangio as well, because it wouldn't be easy for any head coach, especially a first-time head coach. I mean, you imagine if the same situation would have been foisted upon Vance Joseph. It would have been, yep, okay, and who do you want a quarterback's coach?
Right.
Okay, and who do you want here?
How high do I have to jump?
Right, but and that makes you question, did he ever even have a vision, right? Obviously, Vic Fangio not only has a vision, but he is... Look, this is my one shot to be a head coach in the NFL. I've waited decades to be the man, and I'm not about to have, any kind of scenario where I'm not calling the shots or playing second fiddle to some other coach. So I understand why, and I'm with you on that, because it wasn't, I'm sure, easy. With the political environment and the history between Elway and Kubiak, it probably was not easy for Vic Fangio to stick his foot in the ground and pivot like that. But I think still, my point being is simply that if you could have found a proven offensive coordinator in this league, a proven play caller, that's the only way the Denver Broncos could have gotten the coaching search any better than they did. But what you get with Scangarello, the flip side to that, is you get not only a guy who, look, he might be unproven as it comes to being a offense designer in the NFL and a play caller on game day. That might still be left to be determined. But what you do get is a proven, in the very recent history, developer of quarterbacks and young quarterbacks. Not only that, a guy who has proven that he can find and identify undrafted caliber, buried quarterback talent in the draft or around the NFL, different rosters, and identify that type of talent that's left to be mined and exploited in a good way. And that's something that the Broncos have really struggled with post Peyton Manning, is not only identifying but then cultivating and developing the young quarterback talent that they have had. So that's where I hope that it's one of the areas I hope, Zach, that Scangarello can kind of make up for some of his inexperience on the play calling side.
Well, that's also why having Mike Munchak on staff is so clutch. He's been a head coach at this level. He's a Hall of Fame lineman. They're going to lean on him a lot. The offense will flow through him more than people think. But just having that new age voice, that new age in the room, it's going to help the Broncos so much, especially when molding that with a 34-year-old Joe Flacco who's coming from a similar offense. So to me, there wasn't any McVays or Shanahans or Frank Reichs in this coaching cycle. I would have liked to have Taylor and Fangio, Zach Taylor. That would have been my preference. But even so, they did pretty well to back out of the Kubiak deal, after the cycle had started, and still got a guy in Scangarello who is viewed very highly in NFL circles. One more point about Fangio. What I love about him is he essentially said to Elway, you need me more than I need you. He was very comfortable with the Bears. He could have had any defensive coordinator job he wanted. It's just that cool, confident approach that I think Elway respects, and I think the fans can also respect and appreciate.
And I think it's something Elway responded to. I think you're right in that it's not that, like with Vance Joseph, for example, Elway, I think, kind of had gotten used to feeling like he had to be the brainchild behind everything. Like he was the impetus. He was carrying the full load, right?
He was the father.
Yeah, exactly. And micromanaging every aspect where, as a GM, you've got your job and you've got your focus. You can't spread yourself too thin. And you got to have the right guys in the right places. And with Vic Fangio, I think he found someone who he not only respects, but he feels like he can honestly learn something from himself. Like he trusts and values as not just an equal, but almost in a, I don't want to go too far out on a limb here, but like he's got something he can learn from Vic Fangio, and he thinks that can apply in a great way to the Denver Broncos, and the Denver Broncos can have a lot to learn from the wealth of knowledge and experience that Vic Fangio brings to the table. And I think that's part of it. When Fangio made his pitch about death by inches and the devil's in the details and discipline and accountability to go along with all of his passion as it relates to teaching and coaching, and of course his acumen, his actual expertise on the defensive side of the ball, Elway just said, yep, all right, this is it, we're doing it.
I actually give Elway a lot of credit this offseason. He's grown tremendously, and he's admitted his mistakes. He's swallowed a lot of pride, and he's accepting more input now. And that's made him a better general manager, having more of a brainstorm around him instead of taking that final personnel stay to heart. It shouldn't be a father-son relationship with a coach. It should be a friend and a friend. And that's why Kubiak and Elway were so successful, and that's why I feel like Fangio and Elway would be so successful. There's a mutual respect and a mutual bond. They hit it off right away. And that's where, those long-term coaching situations start to blossom. That's why I feel like Fangio will be in Denver for quite a while.
It's pretty cool that those two share such a long history. Vic Fangio shared a story when he was first hired about coaching against John Elway back in the 80s when he was with the New Orleans Saints. And, those guys come from basically the same school of thought in terms of old guard NFL, and both of them have proven, though, that not only are they, some of the best in their field from the old guard, but they've proven that they can contend and win in today's NFL. The Broncos are only 3 years removed from winning a Super Bowl. Even though it feels longer than that, right? Because 3 consecutive years without making the playoffs, it's only been 3 years since Elway got to hoist the Lombardi. And then on the flip side of that coin, you have Vic Fangio, who's coming off a season in which, just about every major statistical category that matters defensively, his defense finished number one. And including what really makes Vic Fangio's job, that body of work last year in Chicago, even that much more impressive and on another level, is they were one of the least penalized, I think the second least penalized defense in the entire league.
And it's the antithesis of what the Broncos have been under Vance Joseph and in Gary Kubiak's final year even. To me, it was such a home run. There was no better man for the job, and the Broncos will turn it around fast under Fangio. I firmly believe that. They might not win the Super Bowl, but they will be in contention. They will have them playing hard every week. Every error that you saw under Vance Joseph will immediately disappear. You're already seeing the culture shift in Dove Valley. Fangio excited already. And it, to me, has less to do with Joe Flacco and Elway and more to do with Vic Fangio, with his godfather appeal and his boss mentality. He's come in and really run the show. And when you publicly I don't want to say upstage Elway, but when you show that you're on an equal power sharing situation, the fans really respond to that because a lot of them have grown disenchanted with Elway and they kind of want him to kind of spread the wealth a little more. And that's what they're doing now.
Yep. I mean, it was one of those situations where Elway realized he needed help, and it was just a matter of finding the right guy who could fit what the Broncos needed in this moment in time. And I think we're both in agreement that Vic Fangio was that guy. So both of us very favorable on the coaching hires and the overall outcome of the coaching search with Fangio and his assistants. Let's talk about free agency. Now, there's 3 components to the offseason if you're going to try and give it a complete grade. And at this point, we got 2 of the 3 that are under the Denver Broncos belt thus far. So it's going to remain a incomplete grade, and we'll talk about what it's going to take to get the best grade possible by the time this thing's all said and done. But let's focus first or next on free agency. So the Denver Broncos went in and they had a few holes, glaring holes. The first thing, though, is they took care of the quarterback issue, and that was long before free agency opened. They consummated the trade with the Ravens to get Joe Flacco into Denver. Now, we've already spent quite a bit of time talking about the quarterback position, but I'm a firm believer that in Joe Flacco, you have a guy who has been to the top of the mountain. He's a proven guy, and he might not be in the same category as a Peyton Manning who, by virtue of his own ability, like raises all ships across the board and is that tide that raises all ships. I think he needs certain things to be in place. If the Broncos can, and it looks like they're doing that, we'll talk more about the moves that have been made and we'll grade them overall. But if the Broncos put the right pieces around Joe Flacco, you give him a elite or near elite defense, you give him a savvy and creative coordinator who can call games to his strengths, you give him some difference makers at the skill positions, and you protect him. You put all those things in place along with the coaching moves, and I think it's a model in which you can win with Joe Flacco. And at 34 years old, he's no spring chicken, Zach. But I do think that the Broncos are on the right track in terms of putting the right pieces in place to maximize the potential for a Joe Flacco type of move to work.
I mean, Chad, my thing is you can say the same about any quarterback in the NFL. If you put Trevor Siemian with a great offensive line and great receivers and great everything, he's going to succeed too. That's why I'm not a firm believer in Joe Flacco, because they're not getting the Flacco of the Super Bowl. They're getting him from last year, who lost his job to a rookie. I've been very much against this move. I know to much of fans' dismay. I give this grade a C+, contingent on Flacco going out in the field and proving me wrong. I am willing to leave it open and say I will eat my crow happily if he goes out and proves he's still, quote unquote, entering his prime or in his prime. To me, though, on its face, it's a lateral move from Case Keenum. It's a pretty much a more expensive, a more dressed up version of Case Keenum, and I just don't think he's going to be the one in an imperfect scenario to lead the Broncos back to greatness. That's just my personal feeling.
I give the move to acquire Joe Flacco, considering the cap, considering the cap hit, considering the nature of the contract, the compensation given up, and also the fact that they were able to deal Case Keenum and get out from under a big portion of that cap hit. I'm going to go ahead and give the Joe Flacco move a B. And I think overall, from a vision standpoint, that grade could rise if the Broncos were to do the right things in the draft. But we'll talk more about that here in just a few minutes. So the next thing, obviously, free agency opens up, and the Broncos go out, and the first thing they tackle is the cornerback / safety overall defensive back, Kareem Jackson. They bring him in 3 years. What was it, Zach? $33 million, I believe. Right. What's your grade on the Kareem Jackson move, considering his age, considering his resume, and the Broncos' needs?
Honestly, the age is his only red flag. He's consistent. He's reliable. He's great at both positions. They're getting 2 replacements in one for Roby and Darian Stewart. It's hard to give this move anything but an A-. They paid pretty good value. His cap hit is not outrageous. They structured his contract well. Like I said, they got a player who upgrades 2 positions. I really like the move, and I understand why they made it, because they're going to move him around the formation. He's not just a corner, and he's not just a safety. He can play all around. So based on that, I give it an A-.
Same here. Exact same grade, A-. Kareem Jackson, the only thing he does not have going for him is youth, and he's not that old.
No.
So he's going to fit in perfectly. I mean, if you look at the quintessential, perfect Vic Fangio corner or defensive back, I mean, Kareem Jackson he's about as good as it gets from a prototypical perspective in terms of a fit and I'm really excited to see how Vic Fangio uses him. Now, the next move the Broncos make, they go out and they fill what's been one of the biggest roster holes since Super Bowl 50 in a right tackle, proven guy that's been in the league 5 years, Jajuan James, 4 years, $51 million. What was your grade on Jajuan James?
He wasn't a whoopee cushion, I can say that. I give this move, I would say a solid B+. I think you're getting one of the better right tackles in football, but a guy who's had some pass protection issues, some injury issues, and the Broncos, no doubt, it's undeniable, they did overpay just a little bit considering his value and considering how the market went. It's understandable. I give this move a solid B+. It'll pay dividends for Denver, but I do want to see James stay on the field because, Menelik Watson was talked up, Donald Stevenson was talked up, and the same thing happened with him. He's a way more expensive version, a way more talented version. I just want to see him stay on the field, not on the trainer's table.
Absolutely. I give it a B+. Jajuan James, the only way I see this not really working out well, the way the Broncos envision it, is if he struggles with injuries. Other than that, I see it as a really good fit scheme-wise, and he's walking into a situation in which he's going to get some of the best coaching at his position in the NFL. So, you want a proven right tackle, you want a talented guy, you want a set-and-forget guy. Well, you're going to have to pay a premium to have that, and that's what the Broncos did. So, did Elway perhaps overpay? Yes, but it's basically the going rate if you want a set-and-forget type of situation. So, I think that was a good move overall. And then we'll get to the re-signings, but the next outside free agent move, Zach, Bryce Callahan. Neither one of us really expected the Broncos to land a Kareem Jackson and a Bryce Callahan, but now the Broncos ostensibly have their starting cornerback trio. We'll see how they end up using Kareem Jackson, but your thoughts on the Bryce Callahan, your grade, the Bryce Callahan signing?
It's going to be tough to throw against Denver, I'll say that much. They paid, I would believe, sticker price, $7 million a year for him, but they got him when the market settled down. They got him at their price. It was a great late-week signing. He's going to immediately come in, and he knows Fangio's defense. Chad, you talked about it. He could be that teacher on the field, helping the holdover players. He's coming off that foot injury. That's my only concern with him, but he's young, he's talented. He's going to let Chris Harris Jr. play the outside more. Another chess piece for Fangio and Donatel. I give it another A-.
Okay, now this is where I'm guessing we're probably going to have the biggest disagreements. Jeff Heuerman. Broncos brought him back on a 2-year, $9 million total value deal, but really if you look at it, it's basically a prove-it 1-year deal. The Broncos can get out with very little ramifications after 2019, but what it did is filled what had been a gaping hole at tight end. Jake Butt, really exciting young player, can't stay healthy. Troy Fumagalli, also intriguing, represents a 5th-round pick, completely unproven. They needed somebody that they could pair with the offense and Joe Flacco who can block and move around and catch the ball. The biggest thing Heuerman has left to prove, and really I think the only thing he has to prove, is staying healthy and being consistent. He proved that he can be that weapon in the passing game, and he might not be, Zach, the most dominant blocker, but he's good enough to contend. And for what the Broncos are going to want to do in 2019 with running the ball and the zone running system, I think Jeff Heuerman can fit in right there and serve as that security blanket for Joe Flacco. And I think there's some upside still there in Jeff Heuerman that hasn't quite been tapped yet. And if he can stay healthy, there's a good chance he can hit that, especially with a guy like Joe Flacco who, let's face it, unlike Trevor Siemian, unlike Case Keenum, Joe Flacco is not afraid to work the middle of the field, push the ball down the seam, and that bodes well for a guy like Jeff Heuerman. So I'm going to give this grade a B+. Jeff Heuerman, I know there were other options out there, and I might be a little bit higher on Heuerman than the average analyst in Broncos country, but I like the move.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think your premise, and for the most part, there's things I agree with of what you said. They needed a body there. They needed to fill that hole. He knows, I guess, the team and the city, and he's going to know the system. He knows the players. It fits from a technical standpoint. I just feel like it doesn't move the needle for me. I'd want either a blocking tight end like Darren Fells, who signed elsewhere, and let Butt come back and take a chance on him, or let Fumagalli, or get Hawkinson or Fant in the draft. To me, they're still trying to justify Heuerman as a 3rd-round draft pick by keeping him around. That, to me, is the only reason they're re-signing him. They had Lacoste out there. They had some free agent options out there. They wanted a pass catcher, sign Jared Cook. It's just I got to give it, I'd say, and I'm being generous here, a C+.
You weren't at any point last year impressed with Hireman at all?
The Texans game. That was it for me. Other than that, though, I remember him going up for a pass and he let a defensive back. We talked about it, Chad.
Right.
He just let him eat his lunch. And to me, he's never going to be that game-changing talent. He's never going to justify his draft status.
That's my biggest gripe with Hireman, other than the health, the injury bug thing, is that he kind of has a tendency to alligator arm certain throws. Like, I'd like to see him, because we saw him at we can all even remember back to last preseason when you're really seeing Hireman as a starter for the first time with the ones, and I think it was the third preseason game, if I'm remembering this right, and he's just chucking fools. He gets the ball in his hand, and he's just like throwing dudes off him. He looks like a Greek god out there just wrecking shop. And yet, at the point of the catch point, later on as the season unfolds, you don't see him attacking the ball and using his body the way you would expect based on what he was doing earlier in the season. You want to see him be more aggressive. You want to see him attack that ball in the air a little bit better, and that's my biggest gripe with Hireman.
He's shown flashes for sure. I remember the Colts game in 2017. I mean, he was great in that game, but then he'll follow the next series or the next game. He'll be invisible. He's a definition of inconsistent and unreliable, and he fits what a C is, which is an average grade.
Okay, the next move, and then we're going to move on to the last topic of today's show, was re-signing Zach Kerr. The Broncos have their D-line. Before the Kerr move, they had their starting D-line pretty much in place with the defensive ends being Derek Wolfe, Adam Gotsis, and then Shelby Harris as the 0-1 tech. And they didn't really have anything behind Harris. And Harris isn't, let's face it, he's not a proven commodity in the NFL. And it's not that Kerr is, but the Broncos needed depth there. He's 6'2", 334 pounds. He's a great locker room guy, fits in with the culture. And Vic Fangio has another underrated piece to manipulate and use on the chessboard, so to speak. I give this grade. We don't know the exact details yet of the Zach Kerr deal. At least I don't at the time of recording this. But just the idea of re-signing Zach Kerr as a depth rotational piece, I'm all for it. I give that move a B+.
Yeah, I think the only reason he was brought back instead of Pecco was because the Broncos want to get younger. Same reason they moved on from Marshall. They're going to replace him at ILB. I like Kerr. He does his job well. He's that big run clogger. He was brought back for one purpose and one purpose only. He does it well. I have no problem with it. I like Pecco. Would like to see him come back, but no gripes here. I get this move a B-.
So let's just say, moving forward, the Broncos have one last box to check in terms of completing their offseason approach, and that is the draft. And that's obviously going to be a huge contributor or factor that determines the success of this team in 2019. I mean, could you imagine, for example, how 2018 could have unfolded? As bad as it got at times, could you imagine that team without Phillip Lindsay, without Bradley Chubb, without Cortland Sutton, Deshaun Hamilton, Josie Jewell? I mean, how bad could it have gotten? And conversely, just think of the positive impact having a solid and a really good rookie class and a draft class. That impact that it can have on a team is priceless. So, with the moves the Broncos have made this far, with the coaching hires and the free agent acquisitions and the trades, I think overall, I'm going to give it a solid B. No, I'm going to give it a B+. I think the Broncos have done almost as good a job as you could ask them to do between the two. What would it take? I'm going to serve it up to you this way, and I'll wait till after you answer this question, but what would it take for the Broncos going into the 2019 draft to elevate their grade to a point for you, Zach, where you can say, you know what, I think Elway did about as good as he could possibly do through all three phases of the offseason?
It's a rhetorical question. What's the biggest glaring roster need for the Broncos? And that's a long-term, I think, franchise quarterback, or at least a quarterback prospect. So if they can come out of the draft within the first 3 rounds and get one of those quarterbacks, it gets an A for me. I'm with you, Chad. I think it's a B+ right now, a very, very high B+ on the border of an A-. But getting a quarterback on the roster and maybe nailing or stealing or trading up for a Devin White, making some sort of splash, is indisputable. A grade for me. So getting that quarterback is essential. That's why it's a B+. I'm not a believer in Flacco. If they would have handled that differently to me, I would have given it an A already. But getting that guy on the roster, it's an easy A.
I'm going to take it one level higher. If the Broncos go ahead and utilize their top 10 pick so long as he's on the board. Now, I don't want them to reach on a quarterback that's, not top rated.
Right.
But if Drew Lock, or if they're able to come out of the first round with Drew Lock or Dwayne Haskins, this grade for me is going to shoot close to an A. 'Cause you know they're going to do well in terms of finding an off-ball linebacker at some point in the draft. They'll add to the defensive line depth. They'll probably add another defensive nose tackle to, really fit exactly what Fangio wants from his 0-1 tech. But if they can answer the question of all questions that has plagued John Elway really since he came back to the Broncos and get that long-term franchise quarterback, I just don't want him to waste this opportunity being in the top 10 to get that guy, even though I understand the temptation of going, you know what, here we have a chance to get a guy who's not going to be sitting on the bench who can help us now. I understand that line of thinking. I understand that temptation, but it's not always advisable to sacrifice, the future to live in the now. And if all your focus is winning now and you're not putting in the requisite investment into the future, it can end up really costing you, and that's as an individual, in a company, in a family, in a business, and a football team. So if the Broncos can come out of this draft with filling some of their other holes later on, as I've already mentioned, off-ball linebacker, D-tackle, some offensive line, some tight end, but more importantly, if they can get Drew Lock or Dwayne Haskins at pick 10, I don't think John Elway would have been able to have done a better job in the draft and the offseason.
Spot on. And conversely, if they come out of this draft with no quarterback until the late rounds, if they go into the season with Joe Flacco and Dungy, for example, my grade would be lowered. They have to, within the first 3 rounds, holding a top 10 pick when there's good mid-round quarterbacks on the board and fast risers like Stidham and Rippon. If they don't get one of those guys and set up at least some sort of a long-term plan behind a 34-year-old quarterback, NFL or not, that's old for a quarterback. Yeah. So if they don't get a guy, if they wait, my grade would be lowered. And I'm with you, Chad. If they can just cement that guy, though, in the first 3 rounds, it's an easy A. And again, for the second year in a row, Elway will have killed the draft. And can you believe we're saying that?
Well, there you have it, you guys. Those are grades for the Denver Broncos, incomplete as it might be at this point, but through 2 of the 3 crucial phases of the offseason. But that's going to do it for today's show. In the meantime, you guys, make sure you are following the Huddle Up Podcast on Twitter at Huddle Up Pod. You can find Zach on Twitter at Kelberman247, myself at Chad and Jensen. Make sure you do your part, leave a creative review, rate the show on iTunes, absolutely crucial. Make sure you also are subscribing as a VIP at milehighhuddle.com 24/7 sports so that you can get in on the VIP mailbags every Friday, which is what you can look forward to tomorrow. Until then, for Zack Kelberman, I'm Chad Jensen. We'll talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the Huddle Up Podcast. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.